Hello guys, it's Firefly here. Welcome back to another World War II Complete History Part 2. Hope you guys enjoy this little treat that I'm giving you. Let go.
Britain and her empire is at the darkest hour and at the lowest point of the war. The forces of Nazism stand at the edge of victory. In the summer of 1940, in a tumultuous few months, the phony war had burst into a dramatic and terrifying real war. After a disastrous campaign in Norway, British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain, the architect of 1930s appeasement, the man who had sacrificed Czechoslovakia at Munich, had lost the faith of British people in Parliament and had dramatically fallen from power. He was replaced by Winston Churchill. Churchill famously came to power offering the British people nothing but blood, sweat, and tears. The spring and early summer of 1940 had brought the British people nothing but bad news. The British armed forces and their allies nothing but defeat after crushing defeat. The continent of Europe had fallen rapidly before the blitzkrieg of the Panzer armies. Holland, Belgium, and France had all surrendered in the space of weeks. The French were nationally humiliated as the Wehrmacht marched down the Champs-Élysées. With the entire British army in France nearly encircled, their backs to the sea, a mysterious moment of indecision by Hitler had saved 1/3 of a million British and French soldiers evacuated from the beaches of Dunkirk by an armada of small boats and ships. In Britain, the country and the people awaited invasion by the Nazi armies. The south coast of England was turned into a fortified camp. The home guard of old men and boys was hastily recruited and stood waiting with desperately improvised weapons. The very structure and fabric of the country was broken up to fuel the war effort, to build planes, tanks, and ships. The population awaited the ringing of church bells, which would be the signal that the invasion had begun. Fear, rumor, and paranoia infested the British people as spies and infiltration were seen everywhere. Elsewhere, the world seemed to be turning its back on Britain and her empire. The Soviet Union had extinguished the independence of the Baltic states, content that Hitler had given the Soviet system a free rein in the East. Fascist Italy had joined the war. The Rome-Berlin axis was now a military as well as a political alliance. The United States remained steadfast and resolute in its neutrality. Churchill promised Britain's enemies that they would be fought on the beaches, that Britain would never surrender. In the high summer of 1940, the battle for the survival of Britain and of freedom in Europe was not being fought on the beaches, but in the clear blue skies of southern England. The story of the Battle of Britain is a story of weapons, a technological story as much as it is a story of collective national heroism and the individual courage of young men. In this, it is a retelling of an old tale. Since the very earliest days of warfare, of human conflict, the need to survive, the need to defend yourself against your enemy, has spurred the invention, innovation, and the creation of ever more destructive and more terrible weapons. And the weapon that hits harder, faster, or further has always been countered by either an even more powerful weapon or by a better defense, better armor, a better shield, better ways to hide. To understand the Battle of Britain, we must look back before the war, when military thinkers all over the world were theorizing about future conflicts. At the turn of the century, it can be hard to realize that the invention of powered flight is an event that exists just still within living memory. That flight of Wilbur and Orville Wright was only in 1903. In the interwar years, aircraft were just one of a series of breathtaking inventions, miracles of science that had amazed the world. Their role in warfare during the conflict of World War I had grown. In 1914, the flying machines were consigned to reconnaissance, to acting as spotters and spies. By 1918, the war had pushed the technology forward, and specialized aircraft, war machines, bombers, and fighters had developed. The Great War had seen the first strategic bombings of civilian and industrial targets. Ordinary people far from the front, where armies struggled, experienced the terror of aerial attack. By that war's end, the technology had advanced such that in 1990, a British strategic bomber was able to make the first crossing of the Atlantic Ocean. Military theorists seized at the airplane as a decisive weapon that could change the nature of warfare forever, as a way out of the horrors of trench warfare. Politicians saw the airplane as an awesome machine that could win wars cleanly, without casualties, in a matter of days. It was believed by politicians and soldiers in all countries that the bomber would always get through. Between the wars, it was widely believed that the next war would be fought with a short air battle, where one side's air force would be defeated, conceding air supremacy. Then, under threat of absolute destruction from bombers, victory would be conceded without any actual bombing of cities taking place. Perhaps warnings would be dropped into the centers of industry and populations would be evacuated in panic, and then denied to the enemy by the use of poison gas. Because the theory held, no sane government would risk devastation in this way. Wars in the future would be clean, short, with minimal deaths and destruction. Experience between the wars had seemed to prove that the bomber would always get through, and that air power would result in the predicted victory. Nazi bombers in support of Franco in the Spanish Civil War had wrought apocalyptic devastation upon Spanish Republican cities. The fate of the vast city of Guernica was held up as a warning to the world of aerial power. The British Royal Air Force had ruthlessly used bombing to economically and painlessly, without British casualties, police the wilder parts of the British Empire, bombing the villages of rebellious tribes in Arabia and Afghanistan, sparing the cost and the risk of British ground troops. During the 1930s, the Italian Air Force had used aircraft and poison gas to subdue the forces of Emperor Haile Selassie in Ethiopia. Of course, these easy successes were an illusion. The Spanish Republican government had no air force, no air defense system that could deal with what were state-of-the-art German aircraft. Guernica was a soft, undefended target. The tribespeople that the Royal Air Force intimidated had no air defense, no shelters, and no fighters. The RAF even had the luxury of marking gigantic figures and directions on the surface to aid navigation. The Ethiopian society that Italy attacked was medieval in its structure and technology. Even so, the Second World War, up to the onset of the Battle of Britain, had seemed to prove that air power was irresistible. Soldiers from Poland to France, across the entire continent, had cowered, fled in panic, and died under remorseless attack by German aircraft in close support of advancing German armies. Again, this success was not a proof of the air power theories. The use of aircraft as close support to land forces is a long way removed from strategic air power used by one industrialized, advanced country to defeat another. The blitzkrieg that had swept across Europe was a new way of making war, but it was a theory that combined tanks, planes, and infantry to defeat the enemy's army. In the Battle of Britain, for the first time, air power was on its own in an individual struggle. Air Force versus Air Force, unaffected by the needs of soldiers and sailors.
Those are some nice planes, though. Oh, that's a way to carry them. I wouldn't be carrying it that way.
History likes to assign dates to the start and end of events. Rarely are events seen at the time so clearly. The Battle of Britain began at the instant that the Battle of France ended. All through July of 1940, there were skirmishes between fighters, minor raids as the two air forces fenced, feeling for their enemies' weaknesses. Hitler named August 13th as Eagle Day, when the main assault was to begin. Hitler's Führer Directive 17 ordered the Luftwaffe to overpower the English Air Force with all the forces at its command in the shortest possible time, to attack the flying units, ground installations, and supply organizations, and the aircraft industry. The objective of the German Air Force on Eagle Day was simple: to destroy the British Royal Air Force completely. Then the Luftwaffe would be able to attack at will, striking anywhere, anytime. It would have air supremacy. With air supremacy, the British Navy would be powerless to prevent the German Army's proposed river crossing of the English Channel. Operation Sea Lion, the invasion and conquest of the British Isles, would begin. All over northern France and the Low Countries, the Luftwaffe gathered all its strength. The ancient Chinese philosopher of war, Sun Tzu, held that every battle is won or lost before it is fought. That every factor determining the outcome of a conflict is already in place, in the men, in the weapons, in the geography, in the minds and the plans of the commanders. In that summer of 1940, as the two air forces prepared to fight, each had their strengths and weaknesses. The RAF was small, numbering little more than 600 fighters. The British bomber force was to be irrelevant in the battle. But the fighter planes were the twin legends of the war: the Spitfire and the Hurricane. The Hurricane was a devastating attacker of the German bombers. Its armament and its design caused heavy losses to the Luftwaffe forces. Once the pilot had the enemy in his sights, the Hurricane made kills easily and quickly. The Hurricane was a dependable, strong aircraft that made its pilots feel safe. Its body was sturdy, and the plane could resist punishment and damage and get the man home. The Spitfire was undoubtedly the most beautiful aircraft. The smooth lines came from the natural needs of aerodynamics and were made possible by advanced revolutionary technology. The Spitfire, by far the faster and most agile. Its flying qualities meant Spitfires were the planes of choice to engage the opposing German fighters. A myth of the war was that the Spitfire won the Battle of Britain for the RAF. The truth was that Hurricanes were far more numerous and shot down many more German aircraft. Hurricanes were far easier and cheaper to build, and the better destroyers of bombers. The two aircraft together were to be the twin nemesis of the Luftwaffe. The Luftwaffe, however, possessed numerical superiority. A huge force of bombers, more than 1,000 aircraft strong, built to three designs: the Heinkel 111, the Dornier 17, and the Ju-88. The Heinkel and the Dornier both suffered from light bomb modes and poor defensive armament. The Heinkel's peculiar nose design made its crews feel intensely vulnerable. The Junkers 88 was the best German bomber. only slightly slower than the British Hurricane, and although a small aircraft, could deliver its bombs very accurately, as its airframe could take the stresses of dive bombing. All were medium bombers, not capable of carrying the devastating bomb loads seen later in the war. It was to be a major failing in Germany that its aviation industry never produced a working heavy four-engine bomber of the type that was to prove so destructive later in the war. As so often, the vanity and pride of the Nazi dictatorship was its downfall. The small, medium bomber enabled a huge air force to be cheaply and quickly built. Masses of the medium-sized planes were more impressive as they flew over the Nuremberg rallies. In addition to the 3 medium bombers, there were 300 Stuka dive bombers. Their distinctive wing shape the result of a design capable of near vertical dives that enabled a light bomb load to be delivered with deadly accuracy. They were slow and clumsy planes in normal flight, and while these aircraft had terrified soldiers on the ground, they were yet to be tested in an Air Force-to-Air Force battle. The other arm of the Luftwaffe's strength was its fighters. At the start of the Battle of Britain, the Luftwaffe was equipped with 2 machines. The Messerschmitt 110 was a twin-engined and heavily armed fighter, and its crews were regarded by the Nazi leadership as the elite of the Luftwaffe. Speed and armament, for as long as the war is remembered, the argument will be which was the best, whether Spitfire or M109 was the superior fighter. The total strength of the Luftwaffe was over 1,000 bombers and more than 800 fighters, against which the Royal Air Force could muster 600 Spitfires and Hurricanes. There was far more to the technology of the Battle of Britain than simple statistics of bomb load and rate of climb, of top speed, turning circle, and weight and rate of fire. The battle could be won and lost in the aircraft factories. The Battle of Britain was a battle of attrition. The side that lost most planes, that lost the more pilots, would be defeated. With equal losses on either side, the side that could build and replace lost planes the quicker would in the end be the victor. A fact of history is that in the summer of 1940, the British factories could easily outproduce the Germans. 500 Spitfires and Hurricanes could leave the production line every month. The German figure was less than half that. Attrition of machines and attrition of pilots. The most advanced aircraft in the world is a sort of cardboard if no pilot can be found to fly and fight with the aircraft. Fighters like the 109 and the Spitfire were demanding planes to fly, needing skilled pilots. The Spitfire's speed, agility, and responsiveness to control would terrify the beginner. In this, the Germans had the edge. Huge numbers of conscripted young men passed through the Luftwaffe in the 1930s, and Germany could call on 10,000 qualified pilots. In comparison, Britain had just over 2,000 young men, scraped together from amateurs, university flying clubs, and the remnants of the Polish and the Czech air forces. The RAF could train only 50 new pilots a week. Yet, the technology of the battle had another dimension: radar. The story of radar is a classic example of how human inventiveness makes connections. In between the wars, a serious question was asked of British aircraft research. Could radio waves be used as death rays, stalling the engines of enemy aircraft, or boiling the blood of pilots, both of which were thought theoretically possible? The scientific reply was that radio waves could not be made strong enough to do such things. They would just bounce off. But a connection was made. Flying aircraft were causing problem interference with transmitters of the BBC. The idea of radar was born. Between the wars, finding and tracking incoming attacking aircraft was thought an impossibility and was central to the belief that the bomber would always get through. The use of radar was to give the RAF a crucial advantage in the Battle of Britain. It would be wrong to suppose that Britain alone had radar. In 1940, all major countries had radar programs, but British work was the most advanced. Most importantly, Britain understood what the new technology meant, had worked out how to use radar, how to process the information, and use the intelligence gathered to control and direct fighters towards incoming bombers. Britain was the only country which, at the outbreak of war, had built a complete network of radar stations. Germany did not realize the value and importance of the technology. Their own experiments in radar were leading in different ways that blinded them to the value of the British system. Still, yet more factors determined the way the battle would be fought and the ability of each side to win victory. The battle was fought in British skies. German aircraft had less time over their targets before needing to return, rearm, and refuel. Downed German pilots and damaged aircraft were lost forever. British men and machines could be returned to action. In so many ways, the two air forces were evenly matched. Strengths and weaknesses evened out in determining the chances of defeat or victory for both sides. A weakness of the German side was their battle plan. Even though they knew their clear goal was the destruction of the RAF, Germany's leaders had no clear idea as to how to achieve that aim. The course of events in the skies of Britain in the weeks of the campaign against the RAF were marked by abandonment and changes of plan, improvisation and bad intelligence, bad guesswork, that seemed, with the standpoint of history, brought ultimate German failure. Overall, the Germans believed that if they could bring the RAF fighter force to a decisive battle, they would destroy the fighters and the invasion could begin. Luftwaffe leader Göring called it the knockout punch. Hitler even hoped that once the RAF was destroyed, Britain would see sense, capitulate without the need for invasion. The Battle of Britain divides into a number of phases. In the first phase, on Eagle Day, the Luftwaffe attacked a wide variety of targets, some airfields, the naval dockyards at Portsmouth, shipping in the English Channel, some radar stations, aircraft factories, and so on. The aim? To rain blows everywhere, to provoke the RAF into a fight. The RAF held its own in this first phase, and crucially, the radar stations were not systematically attacked again after that first day. German intelligence did not realize how effective the British system was. The result was that the attacking forces were always met by British fighters. The skies of southern Britain were full of aircraft. The newsreel showed proud home guards standing over downed aircraft in the fields.
Well, guys, if you enjoyed that, please comment, like, share, and subscribe. And, well, hopefully I'll get the rest of it up and running. So for now, peace.